this issue, and I think it's on the agenda for this week as well. So with that, Ms. DeCarolis, the floor is yours. Or two of you are going to go at the same time.
Yes, thank you so much. And we're just hearing you now. Can you hear me?
Yes. You hear us?
Great. Yes, great. Perfect. So for the record, I'm Jess DeCarolis. I'm Division Director of the Student Pathways Division, and I'm joined by my colleague, Martha. Martha, would you like to put yourself on the record?
Sure. Hi, I'm Martha Dice from the Agency of Education. I'm a Global Citizenship Specialist on the Proficiency-Based Learning team.
Great, thanks so much. And so before we jump in, I didn't know if there were some specific questions. We did review S87 and I have some general comments, but I didn't know if there were also some specific items that you wanted us to speak to today.
I think, speaking for myself, I'm sure others may have questions as you go along. I think it's great to start with the general, provide us the testimony that you've prepared. This is not a new topic for the two of you to come in to talk to this committee. I believe maybe even been last year, and I certainly know last session this topic was also raised. And I think the only thing I'd say is we've had topics, bills that, if you will, are specific to certain kinds of curriculum, and this falls in that category. So with that in mind, the floor is yours.
Sure, great. So I think just to start, you know, we're incredibly appreciative of the long-standing work that you folks have been doing, that Senator Lyons has done, and in looking at previous testimony, what was clearly a commitment to that integration approach, particularly in making sure that Holocaust education is part of our core or minimum course of study. And particularly, I think two areas that were called out are English language arts and social studies under the C3 framework, or our global citizenship standards. And those are both state adopted content standards. And so the more that we can ensure that there are as many entry points as possible for authentic instruction that is meeting the goals, the outcomes, the learning outcomes of Holocaust education as possible, creates a greater efficiency and assurance that schools can continue to provide Holocaust education. And I know that unfortunately I always send you very lengthy documents. But I think it can really sort of fall into a couple categories. So in the beginning, I think we're just trying to make some observations and some areas for consideration for this body. We do provide an update on agency activities to support Holocaust education. I think very specifically two areas. One is providing professional learning for folks to engage in Holocaust education in a manner that is nationally recognized as appropriate. Because I think what we have heard historically, and I think when we look, and we've provided these data to you before, I think I hyperlinked to previous testimony, you know, when we look at what is happening in social studies, it's less about, is it a yes, no, it's not happening at all, but rather is it happening well and in a manner in which experts have recommended. I think the other piece that we've really leaned into is making sure that we can continue to provide some technical assistance in crosswalking learning outcomes that are aligned to different types of standards. And in this case, Holocaust education standards. I'd be happy to, if I can screen share, I could just give you a sense, but they are hyperlinked in the document in front of you. So that folks can see the overlap in those outcomes, those standards as it pertains to English language arts, to social studies, but also to media literacy and digital literacy. And these are all areas of state adopted content standards. And so if you look under that update on agency activities, you'll see that there's some hyperlinks that are called crosswalks. So it's further down towards the bottom, a crosswalk identifying connections between Holocaust education and other SBE or state adopted content standards. So those kinds of things that are really directed at systems, curriculum coordinators, system leaders to ensure, particularly if you're looking at secondary education across a continuum, that we are ensuring that those things are linked and people understand, or there's a translation, because different content areas have different terms of art. And I know that you guys are very fluent in our ability to use acronyms so that no one understands what we're saying. And then I think the, final observation would be, and these are kind of remaining areas to contemplate or consider. One would be, the work of the Act One work group and developing, ethnic studies and equity literacy standards framework, and ensuring that if we're calling out English language arts and social studies, that this might be something to contemplate and thinking about, that the work that group was charged with by the legislature. As we know, when we think about definitions of race and ethnicity, which frequently can be conflated, it's really important that we have a holistic approach to ethnic identity, which usually is less about perceived physical characteristics and really about culture and religion, and things that tend to be more subjective in nature versus what people think they are objectively observing. I think the other piece that struck us is this is really about expectations of public schools. And yet I did see a piece around providing technical assistance to private schools or headmasters of private schools. And I know I've said this before, so I'm going to work really hard to not be a broken record, is just to make sure that we understand that, anti-Semitism and bigotry is not the sole domain of people who have attended public school or are attending public school. And in fact, actually, I would say that this is not the work of education to do alone, that I'm almost positive that we could point to individuals across the board right now that I will not put on the record that have certainly been educated in the Holocaust, but that hasn't necessarily changed their behavior or beliefs. And so I think when we think about this work, also to be thinking about what might be the unintended consequences of holding people to different standards, different sets of treatment. I think that would be a lesson of the Holocaust is, where does it start?
Yes, we have a question from Senator Kashif.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for testifying today. I had a question while we're still somewhat close to the conversation on the Act One working group. I don't have the bill language in front of me right now, but is the suggestion that the language be changed to require the Act One working group to incorporate this language? And the reason that I'm asking is because last year it was my understanding the Act One working group was going to look at this, and then we haven't gotten anything from that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know where it's at right now, to be frank with you. I know that there were some drafts, but I'm not sure where it's been taken up. Whether it's adding language, I'm just trying to think about how would we implement ethnic studies and equity, social equity framework, divorced from a separate set of expectations related to Holocaust education being integrated in curriculum, right? And so we wouldn't want folks to think that inclusion in that framework is not advised, right? Or not permissible. So it's a good question. I'm not sure if I have a solid answer for you yet. I guess I would just want to make sure that it doesn't move forward without the intent of this bill being very clear, which is ethnic identity is really important in Holocaust education. We know that ethnic identity and perceptions of ethnic identity are major contributors to the Holocaust. And I did include a quote from an anthropologist within the testimony to just sort of say, this is fairly evident and nationally recognized and would be important to not be excluded from that work.
And one more question.
Sure.
I'm getting ahead of myself, and this is coming later in your testimony, just let me know. But if a teacher right now decides, you know what, while I'm teaching World War II, I'm just going to skip over the Holocaust, and then they move on, will anything what will happen in that situation if a teacher chooses not to dive into the topic of the Holocaust?
Well, and again, and I'm really not trying to be cagey. I think it's just trying to speak universally about a fairly locally designed system. First, I would just say that even when we did our and Martha and I had the delight of going through every single enrollment in 2021, I believe, 65% of grades 6 through 12 were teaching social studies content that sort of included World War II, AP history, et cetera. So you can even look this up. When you look at AP history, because it's standardized, you're going to be able to see the content, and it's inclusive of Holocaust education. To the degree that we're not aware of a rash of people skipping the Holocaust. I think Senator Perchlik, when we last testified, said that his daughter had already, in 3 grade levels, been taught and learned about the Holocaust. I think it would be really hard for us to know that. We just don't have a data collection system that is organized to get to that granular level. I think what would be interesting, we did survey curriculum leaders, is to have some folks in who are at the curricular level, who are curriculum leaders, curriculum directors, to speak to this, because I think we would be surprised. And I would also say that certainly your bill language as proposed would address that, right? As there is a clear expectation. So like any education quality standard or law, it would be built into the education quality review process, right? In which that would be an expectation. I think where it gets a little bit tricky is, what happens next if we do this in a way that is unique to topics, right, and events, because then that's where we start to get further away from our regulatory structure. So again, it's a hard road to navigate in thinking about communicating the importance of not only teaching about the Holocaust, but teaching it in a way that is appropriate and best practice, while at the same time not getting into a space in which we become so constrained by specificity that we've moved away from our regulatory environment.
Senator Jewett.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jess, for your testimony today, and frankly for everything that you do. We really appreciate you and your work. I have a general question about the charge of the AOE, and my question has to do with oversight, regulation, and enforcement. A lot of what I observe, fairly anecdotally, is that we have a lot of great standards, we have a lot of great policies, but they are not always overseen, regulated, and enforced in the way that I would want to see them. So you can have something in a standard that looks great on paper. Is it actually being widely taught across the state? Is it being taught in every school? And if it's not, what happens? Then what? I think for me, there are certain times when you have to take action and bring things to another level, because for whatever reason, be it resources or staffing, or maybe just the mission of the organization, things are slipping through the cracks. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that fairly broadly, because it's not limited to just the EQS. I mean, I see it in other areas as well. Just wondering if you might be able to speak to it. And I hope my question made sense.
It did. And I think it's this tension, right? And again, it's on our state flag, right? It's like freedom and unity, right? So or frunity. And how is it that we're in this space in which we delegate our authority? And I put the statutory and regulatory citations at the end in that third section. So when you look at whose responsibility is it to choose graduation requirements and delineate them, to develop curriculum, et cetera, it really is at the local level. And that's not to that's the commitment that the state has made. When you look at then state adopted standards, it tends to not necessarily be around teaching about specific events, right, or topics per se all the time, but really about what are the student performance outcomes, what will students be able to do? And I think Holocaust education is very similar. So when you look at a crosswalk of those standards, like one of the outcomes of Holocaust education is that it supports the effective examination of basic moral issues, right? And I think in that regard, conceivably, right, there are many ways in which you can develop that capacity in a student in addition to Holocaust education, right? And I think that's where that tension, that sort of slippage that you're talking about may be occurring. As far as the education quality review process, right, which obviously that as a result of the pandemic, like the integrated field reviews were stood down, that's now being revised. We have the DQS, the district quality standards, which are going to roll out July 2025. Those are areas in which we have strategies both through on-site evaluation and desk monitoring, a review of investment requests, et cetera, and then student performance data that are delineated in our state plan, in which, yes, there are things in which people get put on. People are providing comprehensive support, right? So they may engage in required professional learning and they get some additional funding and support and coaching. They may be identified as needing equity support. So there are strategies. This would be something, if it was to proceed in the way that it's written, would have to be thought through about that integration, because it's requiring a level of specificity that generally we don't have in other content areas.
Thank you.
Yep. I think the other challenge, and this is my sort of final point, would be it remains unchanged that our data collection and reporting system has been designed to collect data, quantitative data in a particular way that doesn't get to the granular level of looking into every course description, unit plans, lesson plans to identify specific strategies or topics. And so, you may know that someone is in algebra, right, or AP history, but to the degree that our SLDS and then soon to be updated system doesn't collect that level of information, we'd have to get in at the ground level, and we want to be thinking through how we would resource the ability to collect that kind of granular level data. And that's outlined in sub-bullets in that section.
Okay, if you feel free to continue.
Sure. So, I think one thing that, and I want to credit and provide an opportunity for Martha, and she's got some colleagues on the line here too, some of the work and the collaborative work that we've been engaged in that I do think that folks have responded well to. Again, at the risk of being a broken record, I think what the data is showing us is that people are responding really well to getting professional learning and support in doing this work better and having access to resources. I've included some of the resources that we've made available and or developed, but I do want to just sort of turn it over to Martha to share a little bit about some of that work in as succinct a fashion as possible with the time that we have remaining, as well as some thoughts about work that's coming up.
Sure. So we've been collaborating with the Vermont Holocaust Memorial. This will be our second annual Holocaust Education Week coming up this April, and we're doing it during Genocide Awareness Week. So that's one of the items. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through. I serve on the board of the Vermont Alliance for the Social Studies, and we had 5 Holocaust-related education sessions this past December at our conference, including one of our 2 keynote speakers. We had one on elections and civic education from the Brennan Center, and then we had Gretchen Skidmore. She is the education initiative director at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. She was the keynote, ran 2 sessions. I actually had lunch with her, and we discussed sort of the Vermont framework and Holocaust education. And then I'm meeting with her again this afternoon at 4. They're closed because of the snow, but I have touched base and we are still meeting. So that's a big piece of work. I've been sharing whenever the Vermont Holocaust Memorial Museum does professional development, we share that out. We've shared a weekly field memo. I share it with my distribution list of over 3,000 educators to try and make sure that we get a really strong professional development base on Holocaust education within the state. Currently, our 9-12 social studies hierarchies are already up and online, but I have the draft versions of the K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8, which are based off of the C3 standards that were adopted by the State Board of Education. And I kind of want to I guess respectfully disagree a little bit with the testimony from last week where it was stated that the standards don't support Holocaust education at all. I mean, some of the words in S87 are directly within the C3 indicators, things like roles and responsibilities and social and cultural movements. So there is the term Holocaust education is not specifically within the C3 standards because it is a framework, and it's intentionally a framework for local entities to create their curricula. And then I am right now, and I think we talked about this last year, still, I know, in the development process of a K-8 framework for educators. And the scope and sequence has already been developed, and I'm working on plugging in the understandings and content connections, as well as interdisciplinary connections and resources for educators K-8. And you'll find, I think last week in the testimony, it came up that this is a middle and high school focus, and why is it not at younger grades? Within the work that I'm developing, you will see things like identity and community and belonging and self, those type of terms in the younger grades. But I'm basing this work off of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the fact that they really think that the true Holocaust education will really begin within the 6th grade. Younger kids can understand empathy sort of individually, but they have a harder time understanding empathy as it's put in a historical context. So 6th grade is really what they consider as the best place to start this work. I also serve as the vice chair on the Vermont 250th Education and Outreach Committee, and we've had conversations sort of cross-referencing things that we need to look at besides just Vermont history and civics and citizenship. And we've talked about the relationship with the Holocaust within Vermont. So right now we're at still our teacher outreach phase, asking what sort of materials and resources would be helpful for them within the classroom. But there are there's a lot more that we're expecting in the future, not only for 2026, but to be used, in perpetuity until, history doesn't really become outdated. We just look at it from a different perspective. That being said, that's also a super important part of these standards because the kids are really asked to look not only from multiple perspectives at things, but how perspectives have changed over the years and why, as well as understand what is good evidence, what makes good evidence, and how they can determine good from bad, which is super important if you're teaching about the Holocaust. I'm probably out of time, but I put other ideas on the document as well.
There's a list of the resources. We're always happy to come back if you want to do a deep dive on those things. And I would just say, before Martha flogs herself too much, as you know, she also oversees financial literacy and world languages and has been working with me on equity literacy work. And but mostly, I think some of the work we've been doing around the K-8 framework, wanting to make sure that we don't design to difference, including to difference to any upcoming ethnic and social equity framework that might be coming down the pike.
Deborah or Heidi, would you mind saying a few words in response to the testimony? I just want to have a conversation here, respectful dialogue. And wondering if you have a response or any comments. Ms. Fishman. Just need to unmute
Okay,
yourself.
I'm unmuted. So I might, there's a lot, Jess, you talk fast and you have your acronyms and you say a lot. So if I misunderstood you, please correct me. But I think you said that 65% of grades 6 through 12 include World War II. There's an opportunity for Holocaust education within like World War II and AP history and that kind of thing. But my fear is 65%. Okay, that's great. What about the other 35%? If only 65% have the opportunity to include it. And then if you're talking about AP history, that is a select group of 11th and 12th graders. It's not necessarily at a young, you can't assume every kid is going to have AP history. So it sounds like there's the opportunity for some students to have the Holocaust education touched upon during their educational career, but they might not cross into those classes necessarily. That's my fear. And to go with that, with the C3 standards, again, I'm not an educator, so I don't know if I quite understand this, but the framework that's there's certain outcomes you want, and Holocaust is one way to get to those outcomes. But just as if a teacher could include Holocaust to get there, but a teacher could also exclude Holocaust education and get the same media literacy, but a student never hear it. And that's my fear, that it can be gotten around.
No, absolutely. And I hear you. And I would just go back to saying, again, this is us trying to give you an estimate because our data collection system just doesn't, for any content area, right?
Right.
Equilateral triangles. Does every kid learn about them? I can make assumptions based on content areas that I would be surprised if somehow they jumped over it. But that's to give an estimate. And again, we know that those learning outcomes that Holocaust education seeks to realize are crosswalked with other content areas. So when we think about media literacy, right? When we think about digital literacy, when we think about English language arts, when we think about any number of areas in which those learning outcomes can be achieved, I think this is where there's that fundamental tension, right? Which is like with Holocaust education, again, I just as I can't assume that it's being taught, you can't assume that it's not. And I think even looking at the survey data that was surfaced, what became abundantly clear is whether people were able to engage and recall. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think that the majority of those survey respondents were adults. And literally that survey was only administered to people 18 and above. Overwhelmingly, people felt it was important to learn about the Holocaust based on their experience. I think people had trouble with maybe the quality of the education and whether it stuck. So you're right. I think the tension is, are we going to move in a direction in which we are mandating specific content and topics within state adopted content standards? And then I think we just have to have an open conversation about what that would mean. Or we can continue to provide the professional learning that we know people want, that we got survey responses from people who were overwhelmingly grateful for that work, to continue to encourage the best practice. Happy to do a survey for folks. I would extend that to this body to say, I'm happy to pull together a survey so that we can maybe get a better look. I don't know if we're having conversations about data right now, but about a very real concern that in 4 months, we've seen a 360% growth in this country in acts of anti-Semitism, right? And that is a real thing. Whether it can be tracked to how public education is being delivered feels a bit of a leap right now. I think we've heard testimony in which people have been not only imprecise, but also offensive and caused harm in how they've taught about the Holocaust, but I'm not sure if we've heard overwhelmingly that there is a rash of schools who are teaching US history or about World War II, but not teaching about the Holocaust.
Yes, please, Deborah.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I want to thank both Mr. Carolus and Martha Dice for their input and for working with us. We've been working with Martha specifically for the last 2+ years, and that's wonderful. My concern again is not doing a review and getting data. I don't think that's necessary. I think it is necessary to ensure that it is being taught. Whether, it is in some classes now doesn't mean it will be next year. The increase in anti-Semitism, yes, the 365% increase over the last 4 months. There's a reason for that, we all know. But we've been working to have Holocaust education required in Vermont classrooms for the last few years before these past 4 months. So, yes, it's more timely than ever, but it's been timely for a number of years. It will continue to be. And that is our goal, to make sure that in perpetuity, that Holocaust will be included in the curriculum in all Vermont schools. The bill specifically states from 6th through 12th grade, as Martha said, in the younger grades, to teach caring and compassion is first and foremost. And it doesn't necessarily have to speak to the Holocaust at those young ages. That would be scary, I believe, but it gradually should lead to Holocaust education from middle school and up. And that is our goal. That's really all I have to say. I mean, actually to refer back to the professional development, that is something that Vermont Holocaust Memorial has been doing annually. We skipped the 1 year during the pandemic, but we are now working on our, I believe, 5th professional development workshop for teachers. And that is something that can easily be done by the Agency of Education going forward. If our organization doesn't exist, it's free to bring in a facilitator from organizations to come and speak to teachers and give a full day workshop. And we're very fortunate that there are dedicated teachers that do attend to this every year. We've had about 40 almost every year. If you have any questions, please, specific questions about this, please let me know.
Thank you. Ms. DeCarolis, can you remind this committee how the standards board works? For example, if we wanted to direct a change, how might it be done, or how does the standards board act?
So this would be
but there are other ways to do this work.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, again, as the bill is written, it's, we're really appreciative of the fact that I'm not sure you necessarily need to adopt another set of standards, and that would be the State Board of Education. So that's under their governance, with the exception, right? Obviously, the district quality standards was a sort of move to agency rulemaking. And I think that we have in place and laid the groundwork for that crosswalk so folks can see the integration of Holocaust education within content standards, right? There are also, though, recommendations, and those live on our site right now, around best practice and standards of providing education about the Holocaust, which, is where I think that professional development, professional learning would be really important. I think where I'm getting hung up a little bit, and I just want to be transparent, there would have to be work to be done. This is not going to be inconsistent from previous testimony, which is, more is more, right? Predominantly our data collection mechanism, our system is federally funded. From the perspective of providing professional learning and technical assistance, that's one thing that I think we've been already engaged in. But I think this issue of then how would we hold people accountable, because we don't have a data collection system that allows us to draw down specific course enrollment content data, would mean that there would be some work to do. And you definitely don't want to engage in work that you don't measure, right? And I think that that's where I 100% agree with Deborah, the importance of making sure that if we do something, we hold people accountable. As I said previously, also, you want to provide the support because people want to be accountable.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think there could be a bit of a runway with this.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, in terms of the accountability, we pass laws all the time that people break. But I suspect, for example, because of our DUI bills, less people or more people sort of think before they get into the car. And if this is law, if this is, with the standards, my hope is that people would say, oh, okay, yeah, I need to, more people would likely teach it, and we would get to the point down the road, give us a little time on the runway to figure out making sure it's happens the way it can be.
Yeah, I actually 100%. I think you're right, and I did feel like you'd been like in conversations with my town constable when you started talking about breaking laws, but then mentioned the vehicle. But I would say that I think that's where maybe going back to the ethnic and social equity standards framework also, right? Again, the more avenues that you elucidate for folks how it can be integrated and how it connects, right, to existing work across the board, right? Is important. We talked about connected literacies on Friday, and this is a great example, right? I think the other piece, again, and not to put too fine a point on it, is to say, if we're going to hold people accountable, and we really believe the importance of education as being a safeguard against bigotry and anti-Semitism, then it can't just be some schools. It's got to be everybody.
Right.
And that means private schools.
Right.
So
definitely. Ms. Fishman, it would have to be brief. As you know, we're continuing this conversation later in the week, but please feel free if it's brief. We have
just very briefly, when we keep going back to the Act 1 and the equity standards, they've written it out. They took any reference to Holocaust and genocide and Judaism out. So I think that going back to that we're hoping they're going to take care of it,
right.
It's just not worth it. I think we need to move on. That's all.
No, I think it's a good point. We're picking this
Has that been
conversation
adopted?
up.
Has that been adopted? Is that work that's completed? It's just a good question.
I don't know. I don't know if they've finished the complete report.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know. But we can find out.
Great.
I'll leave it there. We have the chancellor of the state colleges. We're returning this topic, if not tomorrow or the next day. It's on our agenda, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you then. This gives us a lot to think about.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Just take 2 minutes. You need a quick stretch. We'll be there in just a minute.